Hi, here are the most interesting historical photos that I managed to find. Let's go. Crowd races a stretcher in Hebron after the Cave of the Patriarchs attack in 1994 during Ramadan prayers. Baruch Goldstein killed 29 people and injured 125. Nikolai Kobalkov, born in 1851, became a famous Russian performer despite being born without arms and legs. He later ran attractions in Vienna's Prater and even appeared in a short silent film. An American F-105 drops from the sky as the pilot ejects and a parachute blooms above. North Vietnamese photographer Mai Nam captured it near Vinh Phuc, north of Hanoi, in September 1966. Wenceslao Moguel Herrera, nicknamed El Fusilado, survived a 1915 rifle squad during the Mexican Revolution. He later showed his face scars in interviews, turning one unreal survival into a national legend. This collage shows Karl Otto Koch, the Buchenwald camp commandant, with Ilse Koch and later in court. Nazi authorities arrested him for stealing from the camp, and he was executed in 1945, while Ilse later faced multiple trials and a life sentence. Maximilian Grabner, chief of the camp political department at Auschwitz, is seen in photos from his post-war arrest and trial. A Polish court in Krakow sentenced him to death in 1948. Karol Suchek, a Czech-Canadian stuntman, built a shock-absorbing barrel and rode it over Niagara Falls in 1984. At the Houston Astrodome in 1985, the barrel struck the tank rim during a drop stunt, and he passed away soon after. Igbo fighter near Onitsha in Biafra, Nigeria, April 1968, photographed by Gilles Caron. The cartridges tied to his head show how improvised and desperate the Biafra conflict had become. Benito Mussolini inspects Alpine troops of the Italian Social Republic in 1945, near the very end of the war in northern Italy. Days later, his regime collapsed as Allied forces closed in and partisan control spread fast. The only known real photo of the Titanic swimming pool from 1912 shows the stark tiled swimming bath hidden deep inside the ship. It used heated seawater and sat beside the Turkish baths, a luxury space almost no passenger ever photographed. A Hollywood actress poses at the plate for a charity baseball game at 20th Century Fox Studios in 1952. The heels and headscarf make it feel like a movie set, but the crowd came for real fundraising. A steam tractor hauls borax wagons through the Calico Hills of Southern California around 1900. This brutal desert route powered the famous 20-mule team borax trade that fed glass and soap factories across America. United States Marines surround a captured Japanese soldier on Iwo Jima in February 1945. Captures were rare on this island because many defenders fought from tunnels and refused to surrender. Chinese soldiers train in a tight shield formation in the high snow near the India-China border. A 1996 agreement bans firearms within 2 kilometers of the line of actual control, so drills often focus on close-range tactics instead. A tiny doorless Westland Wasp helicopter flies while carrying a 600-pound bomb. Its empty weight was 3,452 pounds, so the payload was shockingly close to the aircraft itself. Aerial photo shows the Somme battlefield in 1916, where trenches cut the fields into jagged scars. The Somme became one of the costliest battles of the First World War, with losses counted in the millions. A Mississippi River Pearl diver in 1938 uses an old car gas tank as a helmet before dropping into the water. This risky homemade gear helped hunt freshwater pearls and mussel shells used for buttons. Rows of aerial munitions lie hidden in Japan's Okuchichibu Mountains, photographed after the surrender in 1945. The sheer scale hints at secret stockpiles left behind when the fighting stopped overnight. Robert Wadlow, the tallest man on record, plays toy trains with his little brother in a rare, quiet family moment. He reached 8 feet 11 inches because of an overactive pituitary gland and stayed famous for his gentle, friendly nature. West Somali Liberation Front fighters stand armed during the Ogaden War in 1977. The clash over the Ogaden turned into a full Ethiopia-Somalia war that drew in superpower support and shifted the region's balance fast. Armed soldiers moved down Chang'an Avenue in Beijing in 1989, photographed the day after the Tiananmen Square crackdown. The empty lanes and long shadows show how fast a city can fall silent when power takes the street. Farm machine operators eat lunch in a wheat field in Kherson Oblast, Ukrainian Soviet Republic, in 1973. The huge combines parked behind them show the push for industrial-scale harvests across the Soviet breadbasket. Adolf Hitler speaks at an early National Socialist rally in 1923, just before the failed beer hall putsch in Munich. Within days, the coup collapsed and he was arrested, turning a local agitator into a national headline. A massive painted sarcophagus stands newly uncovered in the Valley of the Kings in 1905, before the tomb was fully stripped and catalogued. Finds like this fed the global obsession that later exploded with Tutankhamun's discovery in 1922. A car in Toronto is split in two after hitting a hydro pole on St. Clair Avenue near Rushton Road at about 2:35 in the morning on February 28, 1926. Driver Charles Brewer broke a leg, while two passengers walked away unhurt. Bill Clinton teaches at the University of Arkansas in 1973, chalking up a list on economics and markets. Before national politics, he was already a lecturer who liked turning big ideas into simple bullet points. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay stand on Everest in 1953 after the first confirmed summit. They reached the top on May 29th using bottled oxygen, then turned back before their gear could fail. A United States soldier grins beside a helicopter packed with cases of Budweiser in Vietnam in the late 1960s. The Playboy bunny on the door and the beer hall show how crews still chased small comforts between missions. Barefoot girls sprint across a Queensland field in Australia in the 1890s, captured on a fragile glass negative. Their loose dresses and wide hats turn a simple race into a rare snapshot of childhood before modern sports fields existed. Soviet high-altitude parachutists Nina Pronyushkina and Elvira Fomacheva suit up in Odessa in 1977. Their bulky pressure gear shows how jumps from the stratosphere pushed human limits long before modern space-style suits. A worker balances high on the frame of a giant airship inside the Friedrichshafen construction hall in Germany in 1928. This is the Zeppelin world at full scale, where a single hangar could swallow an entire flying ship. An Austro-Hungarian soldier stands by a snow-built guardhouse on the Stripa River in western Ukraine in 1915. The eerie snow figure on top looks like a frozen lookout, hinting at how soldiers fought winter as much as the enemy. Austro-Hungarian soldiers of the 8th Company, Infantry Regiment No. 84, pose in an Iqua trench with strings of sausages in autumn 1915. It is a surreal reminder that supply and morale could matter as much as rifles in the mud. Former United States Embassy captives step off a plane in January 1981, passing a sign that reads, "Welcome back to freedom." They were 52 Americans held for 444 days during the Iran hostage crisis. American Museum of Natural History staff hose and scrub an elephant skin in June 1933 before remounting it for display. The deflated shape looks unreal, a behind-the-scenes glimpse of how museums built their lifelike animals. Crowds of uniformed people pack the street in 1945, waving handmade signs that shout, "Peace." It captures the instant war news turned into a human roar, relief written on every face. Rubble fills a hallway of the United States Capitol after the March 1, 1971, late-night blast. The Weather Underground claimed responsibility, and the damage hit a Senate-side area while no one was hurt. Aerial view of Warsaw, months after the 1944 uprising, with whole blocks reduced to gray rubble. The city would be rebuilt almost from scratch, turning ruins into one of Europe's biggest post-war reconstruction stories. Paratroopers of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division sit geared up in Pskov in 1991 before boarding an Il-76 transport. In the final Soviet years, they were repeatedly sent to disasters like the 1988 Armenia earthquake. Boeing B-17. Wee Willie is caught mid-air as its left wing tears away over Germany on April 10, 1945. The photo freezes the exact instant a heavy bomber stops being a plane and becomes falling pieces. The cruiser General Belgrano lists and sinks after being torpedoed by HMS Conqueror during the Falklands War in 1982. The loss of 323 sailors made it the deadliest single incident of the conflict. A truck tips over in Arnhem in 1952, spilling crates of gin across the road. The scattered boxes and onlookers turn a routine delivery into a sudden street spectacle. Loggers in Arcata, California, stand on a giant log in the late 1940s, drilling holes to split it with dynamite. When trunks were too massive to haul, blasting them into transportable sections was a rough but real solution. A Japanese tattoo artist transfers a large back design onto a customer in 1955, using a paper stencil as the guide. Full-body tattooing was often done quietly because tattoos were widely linked with criminal groups. Soviet soldiers posed beside the wreck of a German aircraft on the Sevastopol waterfront in May 1944. The broken tail markings and twisted wing turned the victory photo into a quiet trophy of the retreat. A British Mark IX tank nicknamed the Duck floats on water after being fitted with buoyancy tanks in 1918. It was an early experiment in turning a land tank into an amphibious vehicle, decades before modern amphibious armor. Captured Japanese P-1Y Ginga and D-4Y Suisei sit at Atsugi Airfield in October 1945 after the war. Many propellers were removed so no one could take off without permission. The Sedan test crater at Nevada in 1962 was blasted by a 104-kiloton underground nuclear device. It threw about 12 million tons of earth and left a bowl about 1,280 feet wide and 320 feet deep. Afghan farmers work fields beneath the giant Bamiyan Buddha niches in 1993, when the statues still towered over the valley. Carved around the 6th century, they would be destroyed 7 years later, leaving only the empty cliffs. Artoria Gibbons shows an intricate back tattoo of the Last Supper from around 1920, packed with tiny faces and shading. It is a rare early example of large-scale tattoo art made long before modern electric machines were common. The Curtiss-Wright 5Z-7 flying jeep hovers in a United Press International photo from Santa Barbara dated October 23, 1959. It was one of several Army experiments to replace a jeep with a vertical lift platform, but it never entered regular service. Villagers gather for the First World War mobilization in a rural village, watching in tense silence. For many families, this was the last time they saw their men at home before the front swallowed them. A United States military police soldier stands on a mountain of captured Italian rifles and helmets in Palermo, Sicily, July 1943. The pile is a blunt snapshot of how fast an army can collapse when a city falls. A Mongolian strongman presses a massive barbell overhead before a packed crowd in 1956. It looks like a festival show where strength was entertainment and status at the same time. A car hangs off the top of a Paternoster parking elevator in Denver in the 1970s after a bolt failed. The stacked cars and watching crowd show how this vertical carousel garage could turn one small part into a citywide spectacle. Rows of 1,200 horsepower Wright radial engines sit ready for B-17 Flying Fortress bombers at Boeing's Seattle plant. This is mass production made visible, dozens of identical power plants waiting to become warplanes. Liberty ship SS Elihu, Yale, lists off the Anzio beachhead on March 2, 1944, after a German HS-293 guided bomb tore away her stern on February 15th. Before alarm clocks, knocker-uppers walked the streets and woke workers by tapping upper windows with long sticks. Some even used pea shooters to hit glass without waking the whole building. Japanese destroyer Harusami sits in dry dock at Uraga in May 1944 after damage from the United States submarine Wahoo. The torn hull exposes the boiler, a rare look inside a warship's engine room from the outside. Andrew Jackson Higgins built the six-wheeled Swamp Cat amphibious carrier in 1943, using huge drum wheels to roll on mud and paddle through water. It was meant to move troops only, but it never entered service. A couple steal a kiss as a soldier leans from a moving train after returning alive from the Dunkirk siege in 1945. The platform's smiles say everything. In 1 second, war turns back into life. A canoe full of locals floats down North McKean Street in Kittanning, Pennsylvania during the March 1913 flood. That disaster swamped towns across the Ohio River Basin and forced street travel to turn into boating overnight. Priscilla Dean poses as a train conductor while oiling a steam engine in Toronto, Ontario on February 28, 1925. The stunt flipped expectations, putting a famous actress in greasy work clothes beside the giant driving wheels. The wreck of HMS Breckenshire lies alongside salvage ships off Malta, photographed in September 1950. She was sunk by air attack on March 27, 1942, while carrying vital supplies for the besieged island. Bruce Springsteen smiles for the camera after being pulled over for speeding in 1978. Even in a traffic stop, he looks like he just stepped off a stadium stage. A formation of heavy bombers flies over France as anti-aircraft bursts bloom below them. The photo shows how crews had to hold tight formation even while the sky filled with exploding flak. Marilyn Monroe signs an autograph for a 13-year-old fan at the Beverly Hills Hotel in 1954. The mirror reflection catches her smile twice, like a tiny accidental movie trick. German soldiers huddled in a snow trench on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1943, rifles pointed over the frozen lip. Winter here was a second enemy, turning trenches into ice tunnels that could kill without a shot. Boer fighters sit packed together after General Piet Cronje surrendered at Paardeberg on February 27, 1900. About 4,000 men laid down arms that day, a turning point in the Second Boer War. Marilyn Monroe visits an American serviceman in a hospital ward in Japan in 1954 during her trip with Joe DiMaggio. The soldier is lying face down with a back injury, so he could only hear her voice as she held his hand. Ferenc Schiess grips the wheel of a 90-horsepower Renault racer at the Vanderbilt Cup in 1905 with mechanic George Dimitrievich riding shotgun. 1 year later, he won the first Grand Prix at Le Mans, helping define modern motor racing. Adolf Hitler meets Benito Mussolini in Munich on September 25, 1937. This was the Axis partnership in its confident phase, just before Europe slid into all-out war. Babe Ruth steps into a wrestling ring as a guest referee in 1945, turning the match into a packed event. Promoters used his fame as instant marketing, and he even had to dodge action before making a call. An Icelandic postman rides out in 1911 with pack horses loaded with mailboxes. In a land with few roads, the postal route was a slow-moving caravan across open lava fields. Apollo 17 astronauts Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt stand on the moon at Taurus Littrow on December 13, 1972, captured from the rover's color television camera. During this moment, they sent greetings to an international youth science group. This is not Elvis Presley with a new bike in Tupelo in 1946. The printed caption reads, Targul Martiswarler, a Romanian March charm market. The real twist is the fake story, because one wrong caption can rewrite a photo's entire history. A damaged A6M0 dives toward USS Essex on May 14, 1945, after heavy anti-aircraft fire. The blurred tilt catches the split second between control and free fall. Iranian students celebrate the victory of the Islamic Revolution in February 1979, waving a portrait of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The photo captures the first rush of triumph before the revolution's reality hardened into a new system. Japan's Type 4 75mm anti-aircraft gun sits on its low cruciform mount around 1945. Built for high-angle fire, it was meant to fight bombers as Japan ran out of time and fuel. A Soviet soldier climbs over the wreck of a German Panzer IV AOSF-E, a medium tank used early in the war. Frozen into the snow, it looks less like a machine and more like abandoned metal left by a fast retreat. Two kids dressed as space cadets bounce along a Glasgow backstreet in 1970, helmets on and toy planets in hand. The grim tenements behind them make the pretend mission feel like a tiny escape hatch to the future. A paratrooper rests behind a belt-fed machine gun near Az Salman, Iraq, on February 28, 1991, moments after the Desert Storm ceasefire was announced. He later received a Bronze Star for actions in a night firefight. French soldiers escort a condemned deserter across a square in France in 1914, early in World War I. The rigid formation and fixed bayonets show how armies used public discipline to keep fear from spreading. Benito Mussolini walks through a staged welcome in Italian Libya in March 1937, with Governor General Italo Balbo at his side. The raised arms and tight military escort show how the regime turned colonial tours into propaganda theater. Crewmen pose inside the hangar of the Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi in 1932. Less than a decade later, Akagi would help launch the Pearl Harbor strike and then be lost at Midway in 1942. A Polish girl rests in the Persian mountains in 1942 during the wartime evacuation route into Iran. Between 1942 and 1945, more than 116,000 Polish refugees passed through Iran after Soviet deportations in 1939. Marine Sergeant Leonard Shoemaker uses a flame unit on Iwo Jima on February 27, 1945, to clear cave positions during final cleanup. The white jet across the black sand shows how close range this fighting became when defenders used hidden tunnels. Inside a Boeing B-17, the radio operator mans a single gun aimed to protect the top of the fuselage between the tail and the top turret. It was a cramped, noisy corner where one crewman had to watch the blind spot behind the bomber. HMS Dragon, launched in 1878, sits in a breaking yard in 1892 as workers strip it down plank by plank. 14 years at sea ended as scrap metal and timber, the fastest way old warships disappeared. Ouija captures rag peddler Sam Karshnowitz in New York on December 27, 1944, leading a rented horse through heavy snow. A German Wehrmacht soldier shares a cigarette with a Soviet tank crewman during the German handover of Brest-Litovsk in Poland to the Soviet Union in 1939. Clark Gable poses with a Jaguar XK-120 in 1952, presented by Jaguar founder Sir William Lyons. The XK-120 was marketed as the world's fastest production car, with a quoted top speed near 120 miles per hour. United States soldiers of the 39th Regiment, 9th Infantry Division, move with jumbo Sherman tanks near Rath, Germany on February 27, 1945. The Jumbo was an up-armored Sherman variant built for leading assaults. A bomb blast erupts on the flight deck of USS Enterprise during a Japanese air attack on August 24, 1942. This frame is often described as the photographer's last image, taken at the instant of impact. Students and staff pose at Alliance High School in Kikuyu, Kenya, founded on March 1, 1926. It was the first school in Kenya to offer Africans full secondary education. Teacher and art collector Kazimira Basevich sits in her Leningrad apartment in 1961, surrounded by paintings hung wall to wall. The room shows a private collection displayed like a home gallery in the Soviet era. Dominic Sansi, born in Geelong in 1850, toured Australia as a comedy performer, promoted as the world's shortest man, about 2 feet tall. He performed with the Dwarf Combination Company and died suddenly in 1883. A triple 305mm turret on the Black Sea Fleet battleship Parizhskaya Komuna fires a salvo toward Crimea in 1941 to 1942. The blast flash and smoke show the scale of naval guns used for shore bombardment. Natalia and Aurora Jaramillo, two sisters, pose backstage with shaved hair used as part of their act. Marketed as the last of the Aztecs, they were once stopped at the Canada to Michigan border over concerns about their care. Maria and Arita Martinez, Honduran conjoined twin performers, pose with a piano and a saxophone. Born in Francisco Morazan, they were privately tutored and toured with an aunt they called Mother after their birth mother died in childbirth. Tsar Nicholas II and Alexandra Feodorovna present their baby daughter Olga to Queen Victoria at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, September 29, 1896. This visit tied the Russian court to Britain through family links that shaped Europe's alliances for years. On February 28, 1935, chemist Wallace Carruthers and his team made the first nylon, called Polymer 66. DuPont first sold it as toothbrush bristles in 1938, then revealed nylon stockings at the 1939 New York World's Fair. Stefan Bibrowski, a Polish circus performer with hypertrichosis, is shown bare-chested, revealing the athletic build he used for gymnastic acts. He studied well, learned 5 languages, and later performed with Barnum and Bailey and at Coney Island. In 1967 in California, a 7-year-old Girl Scout stands proud as her mother pins a new badge on her uniform. That tiny pin marks a real milestone because Girl Scouts badges are earned by finishing specific skills and community tasks. On March 2, 1992, men take cover beside an armored vehicle as unrest erupts in Transnistria. The images from that day mark the start of a short but defining breakaway struggle that still shapes the region today. April 1916. A French Voisin aircraft drops with a long smoke trail, while a German Fokker is visible at the top right. Real photos capturing air combat mid-action are extremely rare. A young George W. Bush speaks at a campaign stop for his father's United States Senate run in 1970. It is a snapshot of a political dynasty in the making, decades before he reached the White House. Las Vegas in the 1960s. Guests crowd a roulette table, stacking chips under bright casino lights. Roulette odds never change, so the wheel turns the same way, whether the room is full of smoke and glamour or totally silent. In the 1890s at Gull Lake, buffalo bones are piled beside a rail car for shipment across the prairie. These bone loads were sold for fertilizer and industry, turning the last traces of the herds into cargo. Crews stand beside the Nakajima Kika prototype jet at Kisarazu Airfield in Japan on August 7, 1945. It flew only days before the war ended, making it one of Japan's last desperate leaps into jet aviation. Paddington Station in London, 1940. A crowd flows past a steam engine as a small child grips an adult's hand and a suitcase. In the first year of the Second World War, stations like this became lifelines for evacuations and wartime travel. Delville Wood, photographed on July 3, 1917, flooded British frontline trenches from the Battle of the Somme, still cut through a landscape of dead trees. The Somme, fighting in 1916, became one of the war's costliest battles. Workers posed beside the giant hull of Britannic in 1914, just before launch, showing how huge the Olympic-class ships were up close. On November 21, 1916, Britannic hit a mine near Kea and sank. Trafalgar Square, London, 1914. A recruiting desk draws a crowd as an officer signs men up under a recruiting sign. A gramophone and posters turned enlistment into street theater as Britain mobilized for the First World War. A uniformed group poses with flags in the United States during the 1930s as part of the Silver Legion. The Silver Legion was a fascist organization that copied Nazi-style politics and organized rallies to spread its ideology. India, 1966. Women in light saris walk through a busy market carrying large bundles balanced on their heads. This photo catches a real everyday transport skill because head carrying spreads the weight through the spine and frees both hands. If you're looking at a photo, write in the comments. Which historical shot did you like the most, and why? In 1929, Vivian Bales poses on her Harley-Davidson after riding 5,000 miles across the United States in 78 days from Albany, Georgia. That same year, she became the first woman on the cover of a motorcycle magazine. Winter 1914 to 1915 at Bois Grenier. Captain Robert Money and men of the 1st Battalion Cameronians pose in a trench wearing new sheepskin jerkins. The coats quickly became notorious for lice infestations. March 1st, 1926. The young Quinlan building rises behind scaffolding as its new facade takes shape. It became a Minneapolis landmark with luxury shops and a bold slogan on the corner, "Here to be and here to serve." Around 1929, a United States Coast Guard pilot at 10-Pound Island Air Station shows how to release a carrier pigeon from an aircraft in flight. These birds served as a backup messenger when radio failed over open water. April 1939 in Tripoli. Two high-ranking German and Italian Air Force leaders stand on a reviewing stand as troops march past. The parade was staged under Libya's governor to project power just months before Europe plunged into a new war. Assyrian Peshmerga. Margaret George Shello poses in the 1960s in traditional dress, with her rifle slung over her shoulder. She was nicknamed the Joan of Arc of the Kurdish Revolution, a rare title for a woman in that movement. In the 1920s, St. Louis police posed with an armored truck built like a rolling fortress, complete with a roof turret. Cities started upgrading patrol vehicles like this as organized crime and shootouts surged during Prohibition. A United States serviceman walks past women waiting outside a nightclub in Vietnam during the late 1960s or early 1970s. Places like this grew around foreign bases, where music, money, and strict rules mixed into a nightlife that felt both normal and tense. A First World War officer crouches in a crater to light a soldier's cigarette, a tiny, calm moment in the mud. Photos like this are rare because they show care and routine up close, not just uniforms and poses. French astronomer Alphonse Borelli, shown beside his telescope, died on February 28, 1926, at age 84. His name lives on in Comet Borelli, a periodic comet later visited by the Deep Space One probe. Engelsina Markisova, the daughter of a Mongolian politician, was photographed hugging Joseph Stalin, and the image was spread as Soviet propaganda. Later, her father was arrested and never returned, and her mother died in a labor camp. Smoke pours over La Moneda Palace in Santiago on September 11, 1973, as President Salvador Allende is removed in a military takeover. Declassified records later showed the United States backed efforts to undermine his government. Passengers stand at the slanted windows of the Hindenburg dining room in the 1930s, watching the world slide past far below. In its day, this airship crossed the Atlantic in about 2.5 days, selling luxury travel in the sky. Firefighters stand in the rubble at West 11th Street in New York City after the March 6, 1970. Townhouse blast tied to the weather underground. The explosion killed 3 members inside and damaged the neighboring home. On February 26, 1926, Harry Houdini testified in Washington during a hearing on a bill targeting fraudulent fortune tellers. He said he had never found a single genuine medium, turning the room into a public showdown. November 7, 1935. Huge ranks of German conscripts are sworn in before the Feldherrnhalle in Munich. It marked the return of mass conscription after the First World War, staged as a spectacle of unity and power. Early February 1944, a United States Army field observer crouches on Hill 593 during the Battle of Monte Cassino. From spots like this, observers called corrections onto enemy positions. French warships sit anchored at Mers el-Kebir in Algeria shortly before July 3, 1940, when the British opened fire after an ultimatum was refused. About 1,297 French sailors were killed. Chicago teacher Kathy Ainsworth is pictured walking into her classroom with books and keys in hand. She was secretly tied to a racial extremist group and later died in Mississippi after a police confrontation linked to a planned attack on a Jewish community leader. Nagoya, 1939. Female students march in formation during military training, rifles carried on their shoulders. By that late stage, schools were being pulled into wartime preparation, turning classrooms into drills. Buenos Aires, 1981. Mothers of the disappeared march in white headscarves, holding photos of missing relatives. Their weekly protests in Plaza de Mayo became one of the first public cracks in Argentina's dictatorship. 1916. German troops stand at a gas alarm post wearing early gas masks in a trench shelter. These alarms warned units to mask up fast because clouds could roll in with little warning and spread through low ground. Around 1977 in the Iraqi Republic, members of the Popular Army train in a firing line with AK-style rifles. The Popular Army was a mass militia meant to back the regular forces, turning civilians into part-time soldiers. Muonio, Lapland, October 31, 1944. A German sign mocks Finland, saying, "Thanks for not showing brotherhood in arms." It captures the bitter split after Finland turned on its former ally in the Lapland War. Ali Khamenei is pictured meeting a captured American diplomat during the Iran hostage crisis in Tehran. The standoff lasted 444 days and ended in January 1981. June 27, 1981. Ali Khamenei is shown recovering in hospital after a bomb hidden in a tape recorder exploded during a speech at the Abu Zar Mosque in Tehran. The blast left lasting injuries, and it came during a violent wave of attacks on Iranian officials in that same year. 1915. Bosnian troops march into Lemberg, now Lviv in Ukraine, as crowds watch from the sidewalks. The city changed hands repeatedly in the First World War, making every entrance feel temporary. February 27, 1926. A parade car and giant posters hype The Phantom of the Opera outside the Columbia Theater in Far Rockaway, New York. This ballyhoo-style street show was early movie marketing. French actor Jean-Paul Belmondo plays pinball in a bar in 1965, pipe in his mouth and hands on the glass. It is a casual glimpse of a future film legend before his most famous roles defined French cinema. Natalie Wood poses in Cannes in 1962 as a sailor adjusts his camera for the shot. By then, she had already earned 3 Academy Award nominations, making this a rare off-duty moment at the height of her fame. A White Army train car from the Russian Civil War carries a huge slogan painted along its side. It reads, "The Bolsheviks need great ruin, and we need a great Russia," showing how propaganda traveled on rails. October 1941, near South Rutland, New York. Dan Sampson's children wait for the school bus in the family car, books in hand. The scene captures how rural students often relied on long routes and improvised warm waiting spots before the bus arrived. A 1969 article shows heated concrete road and sidewalk slabs made in Essen by Friedrich Krupp, with electric electrodes inside to melt ice. The idea worked, but was costly and power-hungry, so most cities chose cheaper plowing and salt instead. Soviet sailors crowd around Karl Marx's grave in London in 1956, facing the huge stone bust above the headstone. Highgate Cemetery became a symbolic stop for visitors from communist states, turning a grave into a political pilgrimage. New York City, 1914. An industrial workers of the world supporter stares into the camera with "Bread or Revolution" tucked into his hat. The rally erupted after the Ludlow killings in Colorado, where 21 people died at a miners' tent colony. July 1961, Yuri Gagarin grins in the cockpit of a British European Airways Vickers Viscount during his visit to England. Only months after becoming the first human in space, he was treated like a global celebrity on tour. On Iwo Jima in 1945, United States Marines crouch in volcanic sand and fire a captured Japanese weapon. In a battle that lasted 36 days, every yard was fought for under constant pressure. Near Verdun in 1917, German soldiers practiced trench defense by tossing hand grenades from the lip of a dugout. Grenade drills mattered because trench fights were often decided in seconds at arm's length. 1917. First World War prisoners of war stand behind barbed wire, faces exhausted and silent. By this stage, millions had been captured across Europe, and camps became a hidden second front of the war. Jesse Owens stands on the podium at the Berlin Olympics in 1936 after one of his 4 gold medals. His wins in front of the German leadership became a worldwide headline that embarrassed claims of racial superiority. During the Philippine-American War, around 1899 to 1902, a large group of Filipinos are shown surrendering as United States troops watch. The conflict followed the Spanish-American War. Around 1903 to 1904, Empress Dowager Cixi rides in a sedan chair, carried through a Qing palace by her attendants. She ruled from behind the throne for decades, shaping China through reform scares, court intrigue, and foreign pressure. The Titanic's grand staircase, photographed around 1911 to 1912, shows carved wood, wrought iron railings, and the famous central clock above the landing. This was the ship's showpiece entrance. Late 1942 or early 1943 in Stalingrad, Soviet soldiers paused to pet a cat in the middle of the ruins. This tiny calm moment comes from one of the Second World War's turning point battles. The White House in 1865, with pedestrians standing on the dirt street in front of the iron fence. That year ended the Civil War and brought Abraham Lincoln's assassination, making this calm scene feel eerie in hindsight. February 1937 at Skyline Farms in Alabama. A farmer walks a muddy road home with flour and supplies after a shopping trip. Skyline Farms was a New Deal resettlement community built to help struggling families restart during the Great Depression. A Yugoslav man poses in 1948 wearing embroidered traditional clothing with a wide belt and cap. The layered fabric and patterns mark regional identity, like a wearable map of where he comes from. On February 28, 1885, American Telephone and Telegraph was incorporated in New York as a long-distance subsidiary of the Bell system. That move helped stitch separate local exchanges into one network, pushing phone calls far beyond city limits. New York, 1931. The Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform rides through the streets in a loud motorcade with banners and a megaphone. Founded in 1929, the group argued that prohibition was fueling illegal drinking. 1943. Women shipyard workers eat lunch on a steel plate at Bethlehem Fairfield shipyards during the Second World War. Called Rosie the Riveters, they helped build warships while filling jobs that had rarely been open to women before. Fowler, Indiana, 1937. A farmer carries heavy drainage tile across a muddy field to load onto a wagon. Tile drainage was a quiet farm revolution, pulling water out of flat ground so crops could survive wet seasons. On February 28, 1959, the United States launched Discoverer-1, publicly billed as science but tied to the early Corona spy satellite program. Later missions even dropped film capsules for mid-air recovery. Ellis Island, 1905. An Italian immigrant mother balances a bundle on her head as her children cling close for the camera. Families here faced fast inspections that could decide in minutes whether they entered America together or were separated. February 27, 1933. The Reichstag burns in Berlin as crowds watch the glow in the night sky. The fire was used to rush through emergency powers that crushed civil liberties and opened the door to mass arrests. A Supermarine Spitfire chases a German V-1 flying bomb over England, one of the first cruise missiles. Some pilots even nudged the bomb's wingtip with their own wing to flip it off course without firing. April 27, 1986. Valery Yevtushenko photographs the Chernobyl plant days after the reactor accident, with the Unit 4 roof support still standing. By the evening of April 29th, those structures collapsed, changing the site's silhouette overnight. March 1, 1971. Damage fills a Capitol hallway after a bomb went off in a men's restroom at 1:52 in the morning after a warning call. No one was hurt, and the Weather Underground later claimed responsibility. 1938. A huge water wheel stands at Bryn-Yr-Afer mine beside the later Nanty Moch reservoir site. Water power drove pumps and machinery here, turning a stream into industrial muscle. Morning of December 30th, 1943. Men of No. 9 Commando pose with mugs after returning from a night raid near the Garigliano River in Italy. The exhausted smiles and muddy gear show how hit and run raids relied on speed, darkness, and sheer nerve. Ciro the Artichoke King Terranova, an early 20th century New York underworld figure tied to the Morello crew, is photographed being escorted through a building. His nickname came from controlling produce markets. Around 1910 in Sumter, Oregon, a massive boiler is hauled through snow on a sleigh pulled by a long team of horses. This was heavy industry before paved roads, when entire mining towns depended on muscle, ice, and timing. German soldiers sit packed into a vehicle holding Panzerfaust launchers during the Second World War. Cheap and easy to carry, this late war design spread fast and became a symbol of Germany's last-ditch defenses. Lieutenant Albert Lanker photographed these hedgehog beach defenses from an F-5 reconnaissance P-38, so low that the obstacles look like they are under your feet. Some runs were flown just 25 to 50 feet above the water at around 400 miles per hour. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini steps off a plane in Iran in 1979, returning after exile that began in 1964. His arrival sparked huge street crowds and rapidly ended the monarchy. A worker stacks captured German helmets in a depot after the Second World War, turning battlefield gear into inventory. Piles like this were sorted for scrap metal, souvenirs, or study, a quiet afterlife for mass-produced war equipment. A dome of about 500 tons of TNT sits stacked for Operation Sailor Hat, built from nearly 31,000 blocks. The test used a non-nuclear blast to measure shock effects on a nearby ship. Vietnam, 1961. A young guerrilla fighter poses with a rifle and gear slung across her chest. Women played major roles as scouts, couriers, and combatants in the early years of the conflict. Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, April 9, 1865. Union soldiers wait outside as surrender terms are finalized inside. That meeting between Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant became the symbolic endpoint of the American Civil War. Derry, 1971. A soldier from the Anglian Regiment kneels behind a traffic light for cover during clashes in the Bogside. The street debris and barricades show how quickly the Troubles turned ordinary corners into front lines. London, 1945. A British gunner walks toward his prefabricated home in Tulse Hill as his wife and young son run to greet him under a hand-painted welcome sign. After years away, including captivity in Singapore, this is the exact second a family becomes whole again. March 1, 1977. Rescuers walk toward the Porter Tunnel at the Coker Coal Company mine near Tower City, Pennsylvania, after water broke in from an abandoned tunnel. 9 miners lost their lives, and one man, Ronald Adley, was rescued on March 6th. Fall 1862 near Harper's Ferry. Private Chandler Robbins, cook for Company K of the 13th Massachusetts Infantry, stands by his camp kettle with another soldier and 2 boy helpers. He later served as a hospital steward, was captured in mid-1863, survived the war. Fall 1862 near Harper's Ferry. Formerly enslaved people freed by the 13th Massachusetts Pose at a federal camp where they were working. The boy seated at front right appears in another photo from the same camp with Company K cook Chandler Robbins. May 23, 1939. Queen Elizabeth, later the Queen Mother, greets a child during the royal tour of Canada. The trip with King George VI was the first time a reigning monarch toured Canada, staged to rally support as war loomed. February 1944. Gun camera frames capture a Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter over the English Channel as its right engine erupts and the aircraft plunges down. Pilot Heinz Vinke and his crew were lost at sea and never recovered. People wear heavy wooden kangwe collars in public, a punishment used in parts of East Asia to restrain movement and shame the wearer. Some boards were so large that eating and sleeping became a struggle, turning daily life into a slow public ordeal. A paper factory work badge from 1946 shows a 16-year-old worker's photo, name and signature sealed behind worn metal. It is the kind of pass that controlled entry, shifts, and pay, turning a teen's life into a number on a card. Brooklyn, 1959. Members of the Jokers sit in their candy store hangout in a Bruce Davidson photo, all sharp angles, cigarettes, and stares. This kind of corner spot was their unofficial clubhouse where the neighborhood watched them, and they watched back. I would be very grateful if you subscribe to the channel. Every day I post amazing historical photos and briefly tell their story.